there. Hey, it is 6:02, so we'll get the meeting started. I think all of you know or been introduced to Jim Langford. Jim and I have had, and the sheriff have had a number of meetings over the last 2 years, Jim.
Well, we'll go back over it.
Jim gets a special escort from West Tennessee. He comes up here so often, but he's a great guy, and he's going to kind of bring us up to speed and answer any questions that anybody has about our project going forward. So, Jim, it's all yours.
Now, the mayor told me that these meetings usually don't last any more than 2 or 3 hours, so I'm gonna try to keep everybody away. If we can, what I'd like to do is sort of like we did January 2 years ago, kind of find out who's in the room. Let's recap what we did on October 28th. Part of the people here we know didn't hear this, and then we'll just kind of open it up for questions and things. This shouldn't take more than 15 or 20 minutes. I've added 2 slides to it to speak to 2 items that were brought up when we were talking last October 28th. So just for a second, who in here was here October 28th? So most of it, and are most of those folks, are you all commissioners that raised your hand?
Yeah.
Okay. I know we've got a few people here. Mr. Bob Bass with TCI, if you want to introduce yourself and yourself.
Yeah, Bob Bass, TCI. I think most everybody knows me. And then this is Albert Menendez he's our construction monitor guy, so.
Okay, so, and they were not here on the 28th, so this will be new to them. Also is Robert Barrett is here with Smith Dole Construction Managers. He was here January of 2 years ago. Phone's on silent, or you buy dinner for everybody else. And then back in the corner here's Mark Hammer, and he would be the project manager from our office. If we get this thing going. I'm Jim Langford. I'm with Spirit Architecture, who you all are retaining. You all know the sheriff and the mayor and chairman of your commission behind you. What you see is the first slide from the 28th. That's why it's dated October 28th. So here we are, February 6th. And in a sense, we want to maybe have a chance to recap what we talked about on the 28th, maybe get into some questions that some of you might have. And part of that is, where do we go from here? What do we do? Okay, so a little history. As the mayor said, we've been under contract for a while. As we mentioned last meeting, signed contract August of 22. We had a community session, which I think a lot of you were at, or at least several of you were at, and that was in January of 23. So in effect, we've now gone 2 years. And since that time, the time has revolved around looking at some properties, and then we have gone through the programming phase. And then again, to recap, okay, what'd you just say? With regard to property reviews, back in 22 mostly, but some here in the last year or so, we did some drive-bys, looked at properties over to the east, over to the west, up on Halltown Road area a little bit, Memorial Gardens to the south. We've looked at several, but the majority of the attention, I think it's safe to say, is sort of centered around Marlene Street and right in here. But this has happened, albeit a while back. Now, with respect to the programming that we mentioned, typically in an architectural project by contract, there's 5 basic phases. And the percentages on the right should add up to 100%, but it's what we look at in terms of serving you. What are the components that need to be done? The first component is called programming, and that's essentially in a written form. What is it that's needed for the sheriff's office and for the courts? If we look at that, it turns out product is a bound document, and that is roughly 5% of the project. And you see the note that that's site generic. So regardless of whether we put it over there, or over there, or over there, or over there, the needs are very similar. Now, there might be something a little bit different for some peculiar site, but by and large, the needs from a written program perspective in terms of so many cells at so many square feet, so many offices at so many square feet, those are going to be identical. So we call that site generic. We can do that without having a site tied down. The reason that's important is kind of where we're butting our heads here, if you will. Most everything else from here forward is site specific. As you can imagine, if you're going to design a house, a barn, whatever, if you're putting it on one kind of lot that's 10 feet wide and a mile long, that barn is going to be shaped differently than if it's a 100 by 100 lot. And so everything from here forward tends to become site specific. We don't have a site completely. We do in part. Let me speak to that. So again, then we executed roughly 5%. So in terms of the work that you contracted and want us to do, we've got 95% to do. We need a little input from you all. So I mentioned programming. I took that photograph instead of this. Okay, roughly, Mayor, I'm going to approximate, sometime last year, the Barnett property was bought. And in part, the idea was it might be part of site. For those of you that were here that January meeting 2 years ago, you might remember we talked about that possibility. And then since then, there's been a lot of things we looked at, a lot of things talked about. At one time, there was the Holder building, other thing. We won't digress into those unless you want to, but this was actually purchased. So this is a piece of, if you will, concrete component or part of what could be the jail. So from a diagrammatic perspective, we wanted to look at whether or not we can physically place on that Barnett property a jail in the 140 to 145 bed range that we've programmed. And so we diagrammatically, to our comfort, believe we can do that. With the exception, as mentioned at the meeting, our parking's got to come from somewhere else. So that's one of the other things, that other slide I said we've added, we're going to speak to. But the short of it is we can get that 140 something bed, the sheriff's office with his support on that site, we believe. Now, this little footprint that you see has not been or was not at that time vetted or reviewed with the sheriff or TCI, because we're sort of jumping ahead a little bit, taking a look at what we might could do here. So that's something to remember, because we need to do that. Part of that, and that's the other slide we'll show you, we kind of fleshed that out and came up and met with the sheriff, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But it'll fit the Barnett site. So the short of it is you can get it on there. And we developed, as I said, a, for instance, floor plan that could do that. Now, it's going to have to shift around a little bit. There's probably some things missing here or there, but approximately it will fit. And so that picture, that housing configurations can take a lot of forms. This one's an octagon. We think at this size, probably more of a rectangular configuration. But we know and we're comfortable, even from an internal staffing perspective, at least from our perspective, here I'm pointing to Mark and myself, that we believe it would fit and could be staff efficient. So after that, we said, okay, what else do we need to really make this work? And we had been talking about what I'll call, see this approximate ampersand 90 feet of the Holder property. And then this piece of property down here in the corner of the Taylor property that might be there. And then immediately to this side of the Barnett property is the Jackson property that was purchased to do a donut shop, was it, or coffee shop? And they're over there working on it. And then we've got Marlene Street, and then right across to the east of that is some additional Holder property. north, which is where we're at, is county property. There's parking, there's the existing jail, and so some land here that's available. So again, everything you've seen here, we showed on the 28th. So what we looked at is, ideally, if we want to look at the planning for the courts, because go all the way back, we were talking about possibly having 2 courts with their clerks. That's what we programmed. So we said, okay, if we were going to do that, we know we can get, we believe we know we can get the jail on the Barnett property, but the courts require more space. We're going to have to do some things. So we did a configuration that showed that, but that's going to require getting what I'm calling the holder 90 foot at least. And we're thinking that this Taylor part that's marked there, number 1, would be good to go ahead and acquire. And then you can begin to talk about how courts can fit and those kinds of things. So that was a, for instance, and we went over that. And this was just a blow up of it. We talked about this a little bit. And at one point, I don't know if that commissioner's here, one of the commissioners said, can we just look at, or can we look at, or can we, what can we do that we know we can put on the Barnett property, and these other things might spin off, and I'm adding that part to it. And so we wanted to then go back, and as one of the slides that I've added. So at this point, on the 28th, we said, just jail and Barnett, we believe it can work. We really think we ought to look at getting some additional properties right around it, part of which is Holder, part which is Taylor, maybe something shop give or trade or something, some of the property they've got on their side. I also know since that time, there are some health issues with some of the owners. There's other things that have affected the ability to talk and dialogue about this. But as of now, I still believe on your behalf, we need to look at that property if we can do it. But when we walked out of there, we didn't have anything concrete. It was just, we think we can do it. We're going to show you some things here. So coming back and recapping for the day, we've sort of hit, I won't say a roadblock, but we have a hurdle or a challenge that we need your input, make some fundamental decisions with respect about whether we're just going to do the jail, we want to look at doing the courts, where do we want to go? Again, we're doing this for you, so we need some input. In a sense, we're at that point and need to get into schematic design, which necessitates, let's tie down our sites, or at least have that in process, specifically what we're trying to pursue. So that was the end of the meeting on the 28th. These are the exact slides that we saw then. Exact same sequence. So what are we at? On November 11th to the 13th, can't remember which day, we came up and met with the sheriff and went through with him a walkthrough of the concept that would fit on the Barnett property. Does it work basically internally? And we spent a couple of hours in the mayor's office going through it, talking about how does mail come in? How is someone that's arrested go through the booking intake? How the different pieces process? We went through those steps. And in general, we're comfortable this works. Now, this has not been vetted with TCI because we're sort of jumping ahead into something that we've not been approved to do, but we needed to kind of do it to know we can use Barnett. So we wanted to be able to answer today, yes, the sheriff in concept has looked at it, and I'll let him speak for himself, but I believe he was generally comfortable as far as that went. And keep in mind, that was a 2-hour meeting. I think of design and architecture a little bit like a loop, and it's a loop, and then you go a little bit deeper to loop, you go a little bit deeper, and we've got a bunch of loops to go. But one loop that we went through, we believe there was comfort.
Mr. Lumber. One question, your plan there, of course, 144, the support and everything. On the earlier slide, it had that other spot for marked future housing. will is the support stuff on that one, would that
Yes.
suffice for
Yes.
future votes?
Yes. Without going too far into a rabbit hole, we try to oversize in some way some of the key support like laundry, kitchen to accommodate. And then part of that might be equipment. For instance, you might have a X pound washer here that you can change out with a different pound washer. So, but yes, that's
Okay.
some of that's thought about.
Okay.
So, and this, again, in terms of being able to expand, you see 3/4 of an apple pie. We talked about the apple pie. And so the ability to finish that and add to it automatically. And then depending what other parcels we get, that might affect how this is configured for future then expansions. The other thing, the second slide, I said it was 2 additional slides. That was the first. This is the second one. What we want to do is not just say we can deal with the park, but we want to show it. And so you see the yellow total of about 150 spaces. And that doesn't include the parking you have around this building. It's just under the words surrounding parking, just under the words there. You can see this building and parking there. So that's more than adequate, even for, we believe, for the courts. But if you just do the jail and sheriff's office, you're not going to need to do all this parking. Now, in my opinion, you probably won't do all this parking anyway. For instance, you may decide this upper yellow, the little circle says 41. We get 41 spaces there, but that assumes the existing jail and sheriff's office comes down. Well, you might want to use that for archiving. You might not want those parking spaces there. This parking over here on the right, that's 100 spaces. Ball field's still there. It's taking the part of the paving that's existing there and also adding more out in the grass. And that's another piece of the Holder property. What we did was we took that 90 feet, took that line straight across and saw what we could do there. But this shows us what can happen. And so I think in terms of, if I'm one of you looking, have somebody tell me what we can, and then show me a picture of actually how it could be is different. And so we went ahead and did this. Down in this bottom left in purple, in addition to the jail and the sheriff's office that you see up here underneath in the aerial, up across the creek where the 911, and there's some impound yard, and there's 3 or 4 bay maintenance building, whatever you want to call it, that I'm calling the tank, or whatever that huge truck Humvee that you've got up there. We're showing that this could possibly be a maintenance and work and impound area. And what we're showing is a 3 bay, could be a 4 bay, could be a 5 bay, but a place where some cars and those things be parked. I still maintain that the sheriff ought to keep some of this stuff in terms of some areas to park, keep things that are there or somewhere else. And when I say there, up around the 911. But again, that's all part of the conversation, and that's all part of, if you decide we're going to pursue the Taylor parcel and talk to Mr. Holder or his family and try to get this extra. The way that 90 foot in part is set up is that it in no way prevents the ability to get in the north side of the Holder buildings. In fact, we showed some how we might do that to facilitate, to work with it if you got the 90 foot. But again, there's no reason to go too far down that road unless you all decide, let's look at that. We want to move. Let's go. Let's do this. So we went over the 12 slides we did originally, over the 2 additional that we've added, part about the sheriff reviewing it, and then what the parking and use of Barnett. With that, I'm going to shut up. Mark, any comments? Robert? Any thoughts, comments? Mr. Bass, Al?
How many beds is this proposed?
This is around 143, 144. That's a function of a study that you all had done earlier by Jim Park, which was about that number. But this is also set up to where it can be easily expanded. If we finish out the quarter of that apple pie, you're starting to get up into 180 to 200. And then depending on how and what site we get, I would suggest we punch through a quarter that you could add another apple pie. But a lot of that depends on what additional site and then how we actually find the configure.
So this particular one doesn't have court.
It shows a place for court. Something I learned is that, I've got a, laser pointer, but they won't show on monitors. So, but if you see here where it says future court, so it's set up, but it's on part of that property that we're saying we think you ought to get, but you haven't. So we show where it could, but we stop there. And that footprint, the size of the footprint is based on the program. And it's divided in two. You can see a line through the middle, whether you do 2 courts and air clerks or just one and leave one across here. We've had some discussions about that. In some ways, we've not got a lot done, but there's been a lot of conversation over the last 2 years, a lot of back and forth.
So we really can't move forward until we know if we can have that, right?
We know that the Barnett property will handle the footprint of the jail itself.
But in order to make the best decision for the county, we have to know,
to
are we able?
To refine the site, what you're saying, so.
Yes.
Well, the question that I brought up, you know, back in October was, could we fit the jail in what it needed on the Barnett property? And, you know, because the holders may tell us, go jump in the creek, you know, or, you know, we're ideally, yes, that having it all, but my concern was basically, could we do the jail as a phase 1, and then if for some reason the holders say no, that's not an option, so we're not getting that 90 feet doesn't kill the whole project.
The answer is yes, that's the way this is set up.
Okay.
What couldn't happen if the holders say no is that there's not space there for the future courts. And then this future maintenance and impound work area, you'd have to maintain kind of where they're at now.
Right.
But,
And the parking, because the holders on that too.
right, what we'd have to do then is most of the support parking would be across the street in and around, and obviously people will be parking over there since most of that sits open all day long most of the time. Then the question would be, would they let cars to park there? If the courts are not there, then a majority of the jail probably needs somewhere 40, 50, 60 at max.
And we couldn't build millions of dollars on land that we don't know might sell, that the parking we assume
Right.
we can park it at might sell, and we not be able to park it.
You're right. You're right. And that's why you want to then look at maximizing the parking to the north. But the big thing is to have the conversation.
Okay.
That's,
So it's gonna take parking for the jail staff and dispatch.
what we did was
Sorry, coming out here today and.
on this site, whereas on the previous slides, we didn't show any parking, we're able to get somewhere in 15 to 20 parking spaces. So immediate stuff, say your road patrol, some guys having brought someone in to be arrested, whatever, there's parking for that. But for like what you've got up at, the 911 now, where a bulk of your vehicles are sitting, those kinds of things, they would have to be across the street somewhere.
Now you say there's parking for 200 arrested, there's a valley for it.
Yes, I'm talking about, let's say if you had something happen on the river and, you arrested half a dozen people and they're coming in 4 or 5 patrol cars, the vehicle salad port is probably large enough to handle 2 at one time. And so some would come out and have some temporary parking beside it, so those officers could go back in, complete the intake process. So the immediate could be taken care of on the site, but the bigger picture parking, we need parking on site.
And if we got this extra land and the whole would the valley port be bigger?
Not necessarily, that'd be about the right size for this facility. Again, we wanted to make sure that the Barnett property would handle the type of facility you needed, and the answer is, we believe so.
And the inmates, if there was a court room, the inmates would never go outside. They would be in secure
One of the things set up in this relationship is that when we do, and I've got other slides, but I didn't want to bring a bunch of other stuff. Typically, they're moving from jail housing over to the courts as you use your booking intake as sort of Grand Central Station processing. So if you'll notice in this layout, what's backed up to the backside of the court is a vehicle sally port. And so the inmates can come down through back sally port, come across a secure way, come in the backside of the courts on a secure corridor, whereas the public comes in from the other side on the public corridor. You keep those traffic, if you will, separated, and they only meet at the transaction. Here at this building, you kind of have that. The public sort of comes in the front, and you've got a back side door over here where the inmates come in. It's not fully fleshed out here, but the idea is here.
But they come in from the free world. They're not here, they come in from the free world.
They come across the parking lot.
Right.
And you don't have any kind of containment. There's no
Right.
fencing or anything. Here, you have the option to do that if you wanted to.
And is that what the group is running?
I don't really like the idea of having to walk around the alley unit into the court.
Right, I don't either.
And another thing, with our prison out here, all the extra work we're getting in there, we got a 32-page docket coming up next week. And they'll probably bring at least one bus and 5 or 6 million loads.
And we're talking about murderers, rapists, we're talking about hardcore criminals.
And that's not counting what we got transport ourselves. We got 3 in Nashville right now locked up for murder that we have to go get right up here. And we've got to be able to put these people somewhere.
They need to be not in the free world, even one minute.
That's in terms of the courtroom component. That's why we need a holder property. And if we can do that in that connection point between the vehicle sally port and the courts, we have plenty of room to put all the holding cells we want to do and have all that enclosed. But we've got to know from you all in your conversations with the holders, is that doable? That would address that.
If all that property that we're discussing is available and purchased, and here we go, what's the estimated cost at this point?
My flippant answer is, when you're gonna build it. We've been
Right now,
talking-
we're starting to.
If we go right now, I think just the jail, you're talking 20-25 million, but again, we got to flesh out all pieces. And then for the courts, it's probably another 7-10 million. I think if you do the whole thing, you're probably talking 35 million. I hate to give numbers because the
That's all we want
messenger
to-
tends to get shot, but yes, ma'am.
We have a question.
I do, I just want to make sure that she's finished and then we can go. What's the feasibility of going across the street in that parking lot and then also where the 41 spaces are?
Across Winch Street.
Just straight across the street over here next to the building we're in now, in that empty lot.
Oh,
Would be the-
between here and the jail?
Especially with the jail, if the jail is no longer there. I mean, it can't be an elevation thing because we're basically, where we're looking at is probably a higher elevation than this right here, and it's directly across the street.
The floodplain, and we had good internet, I could call it up. The floodplain, you see, you see where the line showing the edge of the creek is? It's coming just where the word parking, ing, and that line dash, dash, dash kind of comes along. The floodplain is, it varies, but it's about 20 or 30 feet. It's right at the edge of your jail. And then it cuts down and cuts, it doesn't get into the edge of this parking, but it kind of comes up there where it's flooded. To answer your question, could we put something up there in terms of the jail and sheriff's office? You see the size of the footprint comparatively. I just say visually from here, that little parking area out on the east side of this building is probably, what, half to 2/3 of.
Well, there's
parking?
that, there's the area what they're using right now currently as a salling port out there by the
And-
mini bar
and-
and then the jail itself.
And we could probably squeeze the jail, but then the question at that point I would begin to ask, if I was critiquing myself, is, okay, whereas where we're at now, we have some options for how to expand.
But it's also in a flood zone, the other across the floodway, which is a little different.
Well, it is. Flood zone, we can work with, floodway is
What
what it is.
if there was a parking garage on the ground level?
We just,
Now I think you're talking about a good bit more money.
Understood.
And then I would say,
Opposed to acquiring other land and stuff, I mean.
well, if I were you, I'd say, okay, I think building parking garages and trying to go vertical with this would be incrementally a lot more expensive than talking to the holders and seeing if we can't get some of this other land.
That's, I understand that, it's just that has proven to be difficult, there's been a lot of opposition in place outside of the pool.
Well, if you say, forget it, it doesn't matter about the cost amount, let's use this property. Technically, we could do some of that.
Okay, so what would the cost be
Well-
associated with developing a plan?
So what we just, to look at a concept for that, take us back, go back a couple of days. I mean, we can do that like we did this, but I think you're talking about, take that 20 to 25 for the jail, 7 to 10 for the courts.
Will we not be able to utilize some of the court space we have now?
You could, right? Let's say you do that. Say you make that fundamental decision. We're gonna live with whatever these issues here. So take that out. You're probably gonna spend that in parking. And then the big question, this is where I was going, is what do you do long term?
Because you're landlocked and no room for expansion.
Unless you do some extraordinary, and if you're willing to
I
spend the
understand,
dollars.
it's just a living for that.
Well, and to address Mr. Taylor's point on the opposition, I think there would probably be less opposition within the court and probably from the public at large about just getting 90 feet of that property or whatever, as opposed to, to what we were trying to do previously was get the entire thing. I think getting a smaller piece of it would have less opposition than the previous plan.
The other
I
part,
could be wrong,
the other part that's significantly different is the other path, if you will, was using the existing metal building and that's over there and all that. This is just simply, I won't say it's, unneeded land. It's just a little, it's in a way residual to that complex. That complex can still operate and allow you all to do what you need to do. And I think way more economically than.
Understood.
With that conversation, and this may be off entirely, but it's my understanding that commercial property, such as the property that we looked at originally, the whole property that we're talking about, requires X amount of area for parking for that side of the structure. They have to have so much property to be able to keep that commercial property viable.
Part of that depends upon the use. And for instance, if you were changing the use to something that was highly, people intensive, say turning into a mall or something that bring a lot of people, a lot of cars. And typically our experience has been where you have a warehousing use or something like that, where relatively less number of cars, your parking requirements are different and it's less. And the other piece,
What are they?
it would depend on the community. And if you were the typical Tennessee county, then what you do is you go to the city. Okay, and it's the city, do you have any zoning requirements? What are your ratios of parking? And it would be what's established. But you all are unique. You and Davidson are unique in that respect.
We can set those, what you're saying.
We already have those in place in the codes and zoning for that district, but BZA can also grant a variance on that. And so it wouldn't be an issue for the holders if they sold it to us. They wouldn't be penalized for it.
And I would think practically speaking, for what they're using it for, there's more than plenty parking down along there. And that's just an opinion on the side, in fact.
Ray, how many, most of the inmates you ever had down here?
I have 80 in there before.
You've had 80?
80.
I just don't know if we need a 140 bed jail. I mean, that's pretty big for this town. But
Yeah, I mean.
I think he can answer that. can't
Well,
he?
the original
That's what we told
TCI, the original TCI thing, called for 105.
Yeah.
And that was About
What
4
did the
years.
study, what did the study, Jim's study say?
In my memory, I had to pull it back out, but I think it was around this side, around 130, 140.
That's what I remember.
The original one was 105. I've got a copy of it at home.
And,
And Charleston County's growing in the population.
well,
That's what it means by
now,
growing.
that's another piece. You all are a donut county in Nashville. And we've had this conversation, or at least I have. It's coming. It's coming. You've got the bridges, it's coming. Let's say, if we decided, well, instead of building the 140 beds, let's do 100 beds. And so instead of that being a 3/4 pie, it's roughly half a pie. You're probably, instead of being 20 to 25 million, maybe it's 18 to 22 million or something. The control point's still there. All the electronics is there, except for the particular cameras in that housing unit that you don't build. A whole lot, it's relatively speaking, a lot of money out of my pocket, but it's relatively speaking inexpensive to get those extra beds. My experience, again, over 30 years, is that if you do the 100, there's somebody that's gonna be sitting in, your kid's gonna be sitting, and they're gonna say, why did we do that? Why didn't?
But that's the point of this plan. If you build the 100, you do the half. Now you got the room to expand.
Yes, you do.
As we need
Yes,
to
you do.
go forward.
But,
Two other half.
but when you do it at that, it'll be incrementally more because you're doing it at a later time and it's gonna cost you more. But that's your choice.
We have to figure out how we're gonna pay for it. That's the thing, is it's the cost associated. We're a small county, and this is gonna be an ordeal to figure out how to pay for it. And so we have to be cognizant of that. We just can't build what we want. We have to build what we need and can't afford.
And still have the future ability to add on to it, so we're not
Exactly.
landlocked.
Doing it all now may not be feasible.
And maybe we do that half the 100 bed, half pie as phase, maybe that's phase one, maybe, or it's phase two, maybe add on another 50 bed, part of it is phase three.
Let's step into the weeds just for a second. If you said to me, Jim, we're gonna give you, I'm making this up, $21.8 million. And what I would suggest is that we take that 3/4 pie, and that last quarter, we might design it and actually bid it. Because right now, as of today, you said, well, if we immediately go forward, what's that actually gonna mean? Does that mean we're bidding something in September, or are we gonna bid something next January? Or when we get all these meetings and all the things, we know from on high, we're hearing about tariffs and other things. And so the ability to absolutely know what the bid's gonna come in at on that day, we do not know. If we do some alternates, what we might find is, oh, wait, the tariffs disappeared, everything turned good, and the bids came in good. So we can do some of those alternates. So instead of just building 100, we can do the 144 or 122. So whatever we do, I'm gonna suggest we have some alternates in there to give us a little cushion at the time of the bid.
And we need to find out about the land before we go forward with anything.
If you hear anything from me hopping up and down, is find out about the land, find out about the land. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I was gonna ask Sheriff how many he's got down there right now.
I've got generally running around 40 right now. We've got a couple locked up in Robinson County, like 4 in Iveson County.
I've got a few different questions. It might not be the right meeting for it, but first question is coming from the people of the district. They want to know why this has to be in this area. Why can't it be in another area? Why are we funneling all of our thoughts to the same area? Another question is, I'd like to know, how much acres is it with Taylor and Holder plus what we already own?
I think the Barnett, what is that, around 2 or so? I'm
1.17.
So if you're looking at all that, what, 3 or 4 acres? Maybe.
Where we this has been going on a long time, and we're in desperate need of a new jail, but building a jail without a court system in it is wasting the money of the taxpayer, and it's also putting in jeopardy the, the safety and security of this county.
He's exactly right.
There's another piece to all this too, that's fixing to come down the pike on us, the fire department's gonna have to be added on to. Rescue building's basically nothing but a shade tree mechanic shop. The EMS building that people actually live in to provide services to this county is pretty bad shape. I don't know if y'all walked through it lately or not. How much acres do we own up there on River Street?
A little over 3.
A little over 3. It would seem to me that working and thinking about the future, that we could possibly take EMS and rescue from the property that we already own down to Broadway, add on to that. We don't have to buy any more property, and then just build a jail up there. It's not in a floodplain. It's on top of the hill.
The only reason we looked at this is because roughly a year ago, you bought this piece of property, but if you all say, hey, let's get together and put our jail committee or whatever, get to work and look at some of these, I don't know the piece of property you just referenced, river, or whatever.
I mean, it's just, we already own it. Those buildings that's up there now, it's not gonna last much longer.
Is there a 6-inch water main up there? There should be. Fantastic. That's a big cost. And then the other thing was natural gas, and as long as it's there. That's the only, I think that's one of the main reasons this district's been talked about is about site prepping. The site prep's very expensive to go out on level ground and start building somewhere out in the county. But that sounds like a great plan. I mean, if the viability of that's a good
You want me
one.
to go back to that?
Yes.
Did you say it's still there?
No, it's in the ceiling. Just.
We mentioned.
Somebody knows here.
No, we throwing curveballs at these.
We're a metropolitan government.
That's a look, but.
There's only 3 of them in the state, but we're a metropolitan
You
government.
know, I'd have to look at the code and how that is defined. Yes. My answer right now to that would be the same. Yeah. That's a good. I would say, you know. You see, 141 depending on the road, you go anywhere.
That's what I was thinking. See that green patch there?
Uh-huh.
There's a road that shows just there above that green patch. That corner there for 141 in that road is the land he's talking about.
River Street.
Yeah.
And utilities are out there?
Yes.
And is it fairly flat?
It is sloped on the backside, so you have to do like a 2-story.
Or you make it flat. Do you know where your rock is at there?
Everywhere.
It's on it.
The county.
It's somewhere. Okay.
It's on the rock.
I mean, you say look at it, we can look at it.
I mean, I think it's worth showing that we actually, we already own it.
But I think what you're doing here of starting to kind of focus in on, is this really where we want it? Where are we gonna put it? That's sort of what we've been going round and round and round about since 22.
Maybe it's like we're trying to cram everything on this little piece of property.
I will say this, one reason we've tried to cram this on this piece of property is that people are still paying for the court building that's over here now, that was built just some years ago. It's still in our debt at this point, and we're still paying for a court that our people are paying for already. I think the goal has been to try to help our people by not saying, hey, we wasted your money here, we still got a debt sitting there. Well over.
Can be fine too, because the public that I've been talking to, which has been a lot, and I haven't said anything to them, they've said to me is, why they hit that old co-op and do that? Why are they wanting to take the old home? That was a problem a lot of people have had, instead of building, because there's a lot of problems with the layout.
With respect, I wasn't finished talking, I'd ask not to be interrupted in that case. But we gave and spent money, and there's still debt sitting on that property. What is the use of that piece of property and the waste of that dollar? We're still gonna have to be sending that direction. That is a part of the question. I think that's also one of the questions asked. Is there a possibility of building multi-story in this, where this parking lot is, and we bought a parking lot across the road? I don't know what those feasibilities are, but I do think we owe it to the people to try to spend their money as wisely as we can. Somebody may have inherited, we may have inherited this problem when we came on, but we still owe it to the people to spend their money as wisely as possible.
Well, I do know the mayor has said one time that they are looking at how much money they're gonna have to spend on to make this safe over here. We need to not throw money to something already incorrect if we're thinking about the public. This building is safe.
It's not safe.
The only reason why I brought this up is because it kills three birds with one stone.
100%.
I like what you guys.
Thank you.
I don't, you know, I don't, whatever happens, happens.
If this building's safe over here, we shouldn't be using it.
And safe. Safe for the way it's used.
I really appreciate the way you were thinking outside that box, so there are some other pieces. We know we've actually, had budgeted some dollars towards some work in the EMS building, and it's pretty much to the point that there's no need to spend that money there, just to waste a dollar. Won't disagree with where you are. When I looked at that track, it's pretty cut up. That's my concern looking at that track. It is an L-shaped track. That's my concern.
And that's what he's looking at, how do you expand it? The other thing.
You can't buy the one beside it. That's owned by the state for the highway department.
They give it to you. Would you trade it?
It's a great question. Can we trade?
That's the question.
They wanted some of our land down here by Goose Creek.
But now, here's
What do you think, man?
here's one piece that this location provides you options with. If you say, oh gosh, the price is just too much, we don't want to spend the money on the courts, you're either right next to it or right across the street from it. If you go out the river, anything, and all you can afford is this, you're driving 5 to 10 minutes. In some ways, it's not the distance, it's the time for sheriff and his staff and all those vans and all that. And so that's one distinction this location gives you that no other location gives you, is a little bit of flexibility with what you might or might not do.
Mr. Bass, what do you think about it?
This is a problem. That parking is an issue in how you orientate that building. And I think tonight you're at that point that you gotta make some kind of decision on whether you can acquire that other property.
Unfortunately, tonight, we can't make any decision.
Well, I'm talking about if you're gonna try to find out if that's, I'm sorry, Mayor, I wasn't playing on that. You gotta decide if you wanna pursue that. So, that parking, because what I saw up there prior to the Cardinals was, so if none of that existed, you're talking about the yellow to the right, we hope we can get that, right? That would.
That and the 90 underneath.
You really
All that is owned by the holders.
Yeah, that's
That's a hard bill.
now were you talking about a, parking, elevated parking?
Yes, that's just one of many ideas where that 41 designated 41 parking spaces are where the current jail is, extending into where that Sallyport area is over into that parking lot to connect it to this building.
Otherwise, a parking
Not safe.
garage, elevated.
Yes, if that was a flood issue.
Yeah,
Otherwise, we have the lot that we were gonna, directly across the street that we're looking at right now, we have that entire lot that can be turned into
I
several
had some
parking spaces.
experience with that in Cheatham County. That was actually proposed and they're obviously not gonna do that because it was gonna be bigger than any building in the actual city. But, and please don't make me repeat the prices because I have them. I can almost recall them and it's shocking. Because they can literally tell you what a normal parking space would cost with flatland construction and then going up. And it is astronomical.
First,
I mean, it's in the 30s of thousands, a parking space. There, I just threw it out, but I didn't give you the exact one I remember or recall. So it was, and I heard you say you understood that. So,
even if it's not elevated parking, what if there was offices or something on the bottom level and then everything else was on the second level? We weren't doing parking down there. Is that still the same case?
it'd be the same kind of play. And it's so expensive.
Do we have to elevate it to be able to build on that land? That's the question.
We gotta come out here.
You'd have to put it on pillars or something to elevate it.
And when you start going up, that cost rises, so.
We go to the new field house over here, it's got to be 7 foot off the ground, they've done started it.
You have a shot of the lot that Brian was talking about, that we can see. I mean, that we can see.
Does your, have a HDMI slot?
I think it'd be easier to kind of envision, if we can see that line, kind of see what Brian's talking about, if we think that should be.
Where's it based on?
The front is to the side.
Is this the front? Okay.
Towards the baseball.
Towards Marley.
Yeah, towards Harley, towards the baseball.
I see it.
Yeah, there's some angled spaces or.
Or the little white, is that the fort, like the little white there on the left side, and I saw the green, is that the?
Sheriff's office, jail support, Sally Court, the housing behind it.
Here we go.
Let's see the sons.
All right, so okay, from what Brian's talking about, you would just be talking about the inside the purple there, that L shape.
Looks like a saucepan.
Yeah.
It's, should say on that.
It says it's 3.2 acres. The other one we said, what, it was about an acre and a half, give or take? Well, this thing, just from observation, looks like about 1.2, maybe a little bit more is in the panhandle. And the main part is about maybe 2 acres or something, so it's maybe a little bit bigger than, but not a lot.
Now, did you see the road that wraps around the main building there?
River Valley?
No, the driveway there that wraps around the main EMS building. So that the driveway on the,
Okay, the little curve.
yeah, so the driveway on the left side there to the driveway on the right, the left side is probably every bit 10, maybe 12 foot difference in elevation.
Okay, so we're saying, I heard you correct. This side to that side is 10 to 12 feet difference in elevation.
Yes, sir.
The thing I would ideally do,
I'm being generous.
because I'm thinking about his operations, is if we could, depending on where rock was at, is to do what he said, is you try to do a cut and balance, and you take the difference, and you chamfer right there, and then you build up right there, and you try to get that close to an in-between elevation so that he can operate. Every time, if you force them into a multi-story and they're doing elevators, just moving a cart of food, just taking inmates back and forth, it may or may not be unruly. It's one thing to do it on a flat, and it's something else to be doing in elevators or that kind. It is, if you can avoid it, it's worth avoiding.
Maybe I misunderstand something. You're saying that entire plat we're looking at over here, the 140 or whatever, 3-4 beds is 1 story?
No,
Just tap it. Oh, there we go. So what we were looking at over here
is
is,
it okay if I go back to the other?
absolutely, before you do, we can draw out and see what the acreage is right there, see if it speaks. This program's got an issue. Got on my video.
But instead of putting inmates or something on the bottom floor, you could do the bottom floor for his maintenance and garage, and then you would have everything on a single floor there.
You could do some of those things, but if you're starting to put a garage up underneath inmate housing, your costs are going up. If we can avoid it, not that it can't be done, but if we can avoid it, it'll be less expensive.
On that lot, you're not gonna be able to. The topography of that property.
The site might work.
Well, that or you move dirt. If rock's deep enough and you can do a cut and fill balance, let's say an elevation here is at 0, an elevation here is at 12. you do is come in at 6 and you check.
There you go. So you're looking at roughly an acre that's in that area there, so you got about 2 acres.
That's what I thought.
So that would be your parking for the project.
Well, that could be parking, but it's also gonna be the drive access, well, but no, you can come off Fruit Valley, that's a public street, right? So that could be part of your impound yard or some other things. You have to look at is how it would expand, because 10, 20 years down the road, you're gonna wanna be able to get some surrounding land. Here, we're already talking about it with respect to the edge of Holder. Here, what's it, these houses or apartments that are being developed back to the east, or getting the state. Both these lots are small enough, you gotta be thinking about how to get property then.
I like to.
Well, that's what he was saying. So, and we're making some assumptions here about can we 0, 12 foot, can we go to 6 and level it out? Well, that makes some assumptions about where rock's at, and how we can do that. I'm not sure we're trading a very, very, very difficult circumstance to a very, very good circumstance. We may be trading one hard for another one's got some other challenges.
But in your views with what we're looking at in the conversation that was mentioned over here, the lot we're talking about right here in town, possibly if we bought all of those pieces, could add that EMS building that we're talking about and that on that lot.
And you're talking about over here.
Right here. If we purchased all the pieces we're talking about.
Let me go back to.
Where you getting when you said
You can
that?
tell where they're all-
From the standard, also the wood swap.
Whether or not they would or not, I don't know, but it never hurts to ask. And part of it comes back to what's that land being used for? If it's just being used for a gravel lot where they
Calcium
sand,
chloride,
other
and
things.
Quonset hut, calcium chloride, salt, and then Quonset hut, things of
Now
that.
you get into environmental issues and those kinds of things.
It's salt. They spray it on roads and it ends up in our.
Yeah, Brian's idea is good, but I think the site prep on that one might be what kills them.
I think the strong idea is, it's looking at property we have,
We already know.
and we need, those entities are gonna need to be upgraded at some point anyway. But we might move property to buy other property.
Well,
That might-
we had a little bit of that discussion at a first responder last month. I don't know how much that you call it. But Mr. Wheeler basically wants to get especially a steel building, and had on down there at the fire hall, he had presented I think 30 by 80. And I think a little bit of discussion came up is would we consider maybe moving rescue or EMS down there as well at that time?
If you're wanting out of the box, something I heard somewhere in the last year or so, and if it's crazy, you start throwing things, okay, I'll hide on the table, but looking outside where there's difficulty in utilities, it is expensive to do a justice center or any of these buildings. But to look outside of the area to put a park is relatively, comparatively, in terms of utilities and things, inexpensive. So I don't know what the park area, trade park and all that acreage that you own, not all of which is in floodplain or floodway, you could consider relocating the park and then making all that usable as, whether it's emergency management buildings, fire station, other things that you got the utilities in this area.
Yeah, but we just put 1.2 million.
Okay. That
ain't gonna fly.
Okay. But you see what we're doing. If we step up, we're having some real discussions about where we're gonna put it, what's it gonna take to put it there.
I'm glad to have learned that it's gotta be inside city limits. That's something, it's not, no one said that. Didn't know it, didn't have a clue.
You would want us at our last meeting.
That's what I'm saying.
Well, we have sewer already, and we have sewer out to Atlantic, so there are, but if it's gotta be inside city limits, there's
We've done it, Obion County. We put the jail and sheriff's office in the industrial park. I did it, 25, 30 years ago. Like I was talking to Sheriff Jackson today at the,
Our industrial park's not inside our city limits.
okay.
That's.
So,
So,
it really matters while we're metro government.
he said he was gonna really find it out, and they said it had to be inside city limits, so it sounded like.
Yeah, that's usually the way it is. You know, county seat is where it's supposed to be.
Well, he's got a good question and it's stumping me. You know, I don't know that the code's been updated to include that. So, you know, we know where Davidson put theirs downtown, so.
The entire county is the county seat.
Yeah, so it's- we metro.
Yeah, I just wonder.
That's great.
Yeah.
Still have an urban district. We got an urban district.
But technically, the entire.
But it's not under, the entire county's not under urban services, sir.
No.
Okay, that's the technicality. Unfortunate.
Good question.
Yeah, I thought we had discussed it before, that it
Well,
might be out.
You know, he's right that there's two, you and Davidson, so we do know it has to be that you get to have a criminal justice center inside the county seat, city limits. Just like the sheriff has to maintain an office in the city, the code's there for that too.
May I speak to that?
Please, sir. Our county attorney is online here. He's homesick, but he would like to speak.
I'm home with health issues. I don't want to contaminate anybody. I think you could probably do it under some form of a special services district. So I don't know that I'm really overly concerned about it has to be within the urban services. However, I think we could get to that at some point if we needed to. So that doesn't concern me as much as it would as if it were a regular county government.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for,
Could you repeat what I said? I couldn't hear all of it.
would you like to step up here and have him repeat it that way? Because I don't have a way to make it any louder and I can't repeat it all verbatim.
He basically said, my court, he'd be up here.
He basically said it could go, we could conceivably create a special services district.
If it were outside of urban services, and that's nowhere near as much of a concern to him at this time as whether this was a regular county or being metro and having to deal with urban services district. We can't create a special services district if we need. So we're not 100% tied to that, is what he was saying.
Jail, but not.
About 90 feet of the Holder property that we would be interested in. I'm not dragging my feet on this. I want you to know that, you know, when a man's down to 128 pounds, you don't go in and ask him, will he see you 90 feet? Especially with the history we've had with the Holders. So I'm monitoring how he's doing, and I'm more concerned about his health than I am, you know, getting that 90 feet. But if y'all want to go in another direction on that, or have me contact his boys, you know, you can give me some direction on this. I mean, it's not holding us up more than we've been held up, but it's a sticking point at this point. You know, I'm just disinclined to walk into this hospital running out of steam just about every day because he's my friend. And I take him milkshakes because he needs to gain weight, okay? But, you know,
That was part of the reason I had asked originally, could we do phase one on the Barnett property, and then whenever, you know, if Mr. Holder recovers and, you know, we're able to talk to him in the future, or if we have to deal with this error in the future.
but if that doesn't happen, we can't get that, you know, where it kind of stuff.
You are his friend. How do you think he would feel?
I don't know. My biggest concern is how he's doing, you know, and he was beginning to gain weight and doing well, and then he had acute appendicitis, and we shipped him to Nashville, he had surgery, and he's back, he's gaining weight, and seems to be doing well right now. He's had everything he could have in the last 2 years.
I think you would be the one to know whether you should.
I mean, it's super sensitive. It's just a sensitive issue.
I'd say best to talk on the board, but I don't know that I'd even want to have that conversation right now.
What about the viability of talking to the boys? Is that viable? You know, gently. I mean, that's just, you mentioned it. I didn't know if that was viable, or do we just let it lie for a while on that one, but, and then move forward as our other plan? I know doing it in phases, as the gentleman here has spoke in front of us about, doing it in phases is those additional phases are gonna be exponentially higher. A lot higher. And as it is right now, the struggle is trying to figure out how we're gonna cover the spread initially. Covering the spread when it's a lot higher is gonna be a bigger concern.
But we would have to decide to go with the very first one where it all fits on the land. We couldn't say, we're gonna do this later. Those boys they were very upset with what happened there. We may never get that land.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, yes.
Yeah, in a perfect world, and I've been involved in these discussions for 2.5 years. In a perfect world, you got everything under one roof, you don't have to take prisoners outside, and the courtrooms are out there, and you've got cameras, and you cut down on your staff, because they're monitoring for these, what do they call them? Where they're sitting, where the towers, and they're watching everything. But for a county our size, that's incredibly expensive to find the piece of property and do all that. And it's nice, it's the Cadillac.
I realize that. I just want the county to know you are dealing with prisoners that are nothing like has ever been seen here before. They're coming to our courts, every court session.
And I think our judges are beginning to realize that if it's serious criminal, you gotta, but those less serious that can be handled a different way rather than being incarcerated, someone's writing bad checks, and I'm not saying that's not bad, but I'm saying there's some crimes that can be dealt with without filling the jails up.
If it wasn't for the judges now, or if you want to. Well, asked me, like Judge Kane, when I was business. I've been locking people up and not putting them on probation. So, I don't want to place it.
It's a very complicated issue.
I can tell you, there's a whole lot of difference between a convict and an inmate. And it was said earlier about the safety of this justice center over here. No, it's only safe because of manpower that's used when they're all here. This wasn't made to hold and to house these types of people. Cliff Lee's been over here no telling how many times, because they knocking the power out. They doing everything they can and they don't care. Having them on the street, it's just a safety, it's a risk.
And I do realize some of you are tired of hearing me, but transportation is when the public and the guards and the COs and the sheriff's department is at their most dangerous risk. An inmate at a state prison is never told they're going to be moved. It is private, but they always know for safety, for the transporter, the driver, the guard. But they always know because they have a legal right to know when they're going to court. We know, I'm sure everyone in here knows, the nurse was followed home and had multiple shots fired at her car. They intended to kill her. So when a gang member knows they're going to court, all they have to do is make a call. And people will be killed in the parking lot if their intention is for them to escape.
Question, if given, we're not sure if we even want to talk to the holders at this point, you'll get given a jail operation. And what Bubba had mentioned about the 150 versus 100, what if we took that just Barnett property, make that just the rectangle, take that segment off, put the courts on that left side, down that left side. Would that work?
Tell me again what you just said. Okay.
Where that housing shifts based on that L,
Right.
cut off that, take that lift bit where future housing can just go straight up. That's the jail part. You have that remaining part of the, or that property, make that courts.
So are you saying put the courts kind of between the coffee shop and?
Yes.
and the
Yes. Yeah, would that be?
What you're saying?
Well, I mean, I'm just asking me, what's that?
Well, I understand, but the part where he said, put the courts over there between the two. Now, this is rotated, but it is putting the courts over there between the two.
The problem would be is your control point is in the inside corner of the L.
Okay.
To where the staff can look at inmates.
Okay.
So by cutting off the L and building up against it, you just cut off your expansion without another control point.
All right,
But that layout allows you to still have the expansion.
but let's. Well, I started to throw out an idea, but I'm not sure I want to do it. This idea though does accept the fact that, you're getting that 90 foot. Now, that Mark, look inside my brain here.
I'm trying.
Let's take the housing, the sheriff and the support, invert it 180 degrees or whatever, flip it over.
Yeah.
So the housing's along Main Street. And what we do is we only build the support and the housing now, and the 90 foot is for the sheriff's office in the future. And for the current time, we leave the sheriff's office across the street, and that's a pain in the rear, but at least the full detention component is built, and you've got room for the courts. Now, this does assume we're getting a sliver here from our donut or coffee shop, but it sort of follows that line. And then the 90 foot becomes late. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but then,
Oh, I know there's some issues.
well, yeah, your expansion for your housing would be towards the main street.
So all you'd be able to maybe do is fill out that one
Yeah.
pie. And then at that point, if you're gonna add to the pie, you've got to go into Marlene Street.
Yeah, you got to. So that would be your grandkids.
So it's sort of following along, there are some things you could do with that, but each has its own issues that you sort of gotta drive through.
That's why I want to bring it up, and what would the issues be, or in that, so.
The nice thing about going from this to what we did was we felt like it not only spoke to something relatively near term, but it also spoke to potentially long term, and that was the. But it all was predicated on having a conversation and being able to get that.
May I ask a silly question?
Yes, sir.
And this is, Ray, understand where I'm going with this. Is it feasible to put the sheriff's offices upstairs above the courts? That's a different situation altogether.
Yes,
That would give us that square footage on the ground floor.
or you could do it the other way. You could say, put the courts above the sheriff. It would be whoever's upstairs is gonna have the inconvenience of having to come in and go up some stairs or elevators to function.
I would think there would be, for the sheriff's, it would be his, his staff, opposed to trying to move inmates through.
Not inmates. I'm just sitting there. I thought I heard you
I'm just
say,
curious.
put the sheriff's
Trying to
office
get
in
an
the
inch out, or
courts.
gain an inch here and there.
But what you're saying is create, well, I'm putting words in your mouth here. What I heard you say is, could you take the sheriff's office, which is quote office space, and the courts and clerks, which is in a way office space, and put them in a silo, if you will. For the moment, we can discuss. I'm thinking operationally from his point of view. I know when I go into my house, it's a 2-story, my bedroom's upstairs. And I don't know if you all this way, you don't mind going upstairs. Well, I've gotten to where I try to think about ways, if I go upstairs, I'm gonna do everything I'm gonna do up there before I come. It's just pain in the butt. And so if I can avoid it, so I'm thinking that the sheriff's office operation is gonna be fooling with the housing, that it would be more efficient to have it where it's easy access into the housing and then put the courts above that.
Okay, I'm just,
But that's an idea.
well, I'm just trying to figure out how to squeeze another inch when we don't have it. And if somebody was above somebody else,
I don't know why you couldn't do the courts upstairs.
just out of curiosity.
It would just be the movement of
Courts are
inmates.
upstairs, court and
would be the only-
are upstairs.
Sir,
Listen, the movement of inmates would have to be done at the back, and we'd have to do an elevator back there,
understood.
but I think that would, I mean.
But if you do that, that would reduce the footprint. Can you now put it between next door?
I come back to what he was saying. If we take, and this gives you your expansion, if we take the blue, which is the sheriff's, and take the courts, and so, okay, with the courts, you're willing to do so that, Chancery or Circuit will be on top of each other, and the sheriff's office on the ground floor, and so you have a silo over here on the left, and then you take support and housing, which right now encroaches down to that 90, but since the sheriff's been moved over, it slots up and it does what you're talking about. And yet you still have the expansion capabilities later for the holder.
Should that happen?
Well, eventually, this county, if this were a cat, say Clay County or someplace out in the boonies, but you're next to Nashville, the need will eventually, you may never see it, but it's coming.
Oh, it's coming.
It's coming. But that accounts for that.
What about housing support and sheriff downstairs and all the courts upstairs?
Well, the support would be downstairs, but you got your booking intake and those kinds of things, so that vehicle sally ports ideally being on the ground floor would be good. But it would almost be like the blue, imagine disappears because it's slid under the orange of the courts, and you could even have this other court on top of that, so that's 3 levels. And then the support and housing, which is the green and the red, slides up so that you're no longer in this phase.
Exactly.
Why didn't it
The
just be
one thing I want to sort of throw out there, just think about, is if you're wanting to go vertically, we need to do it all now. Because if you try to plan for the future.
Even if it's just empty space and not finished out.
Yeah, because what happens is building codes change, and by the time you get around and say, well, we're gonna build that 3rd level, there's no telling what'll happen. And we've had it happen.
Here's a solution to that. If you do the sheriff's office and just 1 court above.
Yeah.
Okay. Where the future court is at is still reserved for the future court. Even if you go and do 2 courts above.
Yeah.
You take where the future court's at and still reserve it for future, so that you're not having to try to add up on that.
Yeah, it's already done. Do it all.
Yeah. And then this housing then can come south onto this whole, but now, if we pursue that, not a bad idea.
I was just thinking if we could slide the housing towards the street
But
and move those things around.
you still,
That takes us out of that 90 square foot, or that 90 feet
you still
issue.
gonna have to have some parking across to the north here where the more parking over here, or have at least the holders accept the fact that you're gonna have some parking over there because you're gonna need it.
When you have parking where the future court area is. Because
Some, but it's not enough.
Okay.
I mean, you probably can get 20, 30 spaces there in that footprint or whatever.
With that and the 41, 43 that were across the way.
Yes, yeah, but that's my point. You just gotta keep in mind, we're gonna be using that other space, but I kinda like that idea. That's what I'm sitting here thinking. If we bought our trash and paper and all that, we could sketch that out, but.
And now going vertical like that, how much does that add to the cost of the building?
If we do,
Because it is office.
if
it's
we
not-
keep it only as office,
Yeah.
and we do it all at once, and we don't plan to try to go later on top of it, then I think it's office relatively efficient. I would keep him on the ground floor and courts above. You're gonna have some elevators and stairs and that kind of thing, but then maybe it's a wash in terms of the smaller slab footprint and all that.
And save costs and site for not being eligible.
Exactly.
But if you redo it, I don't think you should even look at us ever getting anything from the whole.
Well, you're, I think eventually, but I'm saying maybe 50 years down the road, not anytime soon.
Past that, where are they going?
Well, that's true, that's true. Well, I'm gonna
$20,000.
You're expanding, you've got 2 units that you can expand there, so you're going to 200.
Well,
Bed facility.
that would be getting close to that, so it's not, it would be 2 expansions down the road that you're thinking about that.
But you'd still be on that property, not having to be in the 90 foot, because you moved that housing north.
What you want.
The other thing in this idea, let's run with it a second. It was
Could spend 2 or 3 years.
Possibly
Going to the eminent domain, take the whole 12 acres.
Wouldn't have to have it. Conversation.
But we'd still have to buy the Taylor property to offset what we take from them.
If they'd be willing to, because if that's just on parking, half a dozen, 1/6 of the other. I kind of like that.
Is this something you do off to one of you?
Well, what I was about to suggest is that we go away and take that as a concept and, what y'all's commission meeting?
The fourth Monday, our next work session will be Tuesday the 18th.
Of March.
No, this month.
February.
Yeah, February.
So it's in like 3 or 4 days?
No, yeah,
Monday night.
our regular work session is the week after next.
It's your regular.
Yeah, our regular work.
Our regular session was February the 18th.
Yeah, our regular commission meeting is the 4th Monday, so it's
What if we come back to 18 with a variation of that, showing what we just talked about?
I like it.
Yeah.
And then if all seems to be good, then you can make some decisions the 18th maybe.
But before we go that far, and because I don't know what those costs are and things of that nature, when I look at Tennessee Property Viewer, it shows that our scrap that we purchased is not what you got. It shows that we already put all the way to the Taylor property, according to the drawing of Tennessee Property Viewer right now. It shows we actually back up to that little cutoff road of Marlene.
I would be careful using
As
that.
I won't disagree because it's usually never perfectly on.
Yeah.
However, it does show that the property butts up to Taylor property. It usually doesn't show connections without it being a connection.
Yeah.
Do you hear what I'm saying? I agree if it's just a line behind you,
Then,
but generally a connection.
then
It's not
what
gonna be-
we'll do is go back to the engineers and surveyors that showed us the plats and ask them to recheck that.
Yeah.
That'd irritate me, find out that line was that far off.
It's quite a bit off.
It appears to be quite a bit off by.
Okay, then that's the other thing we can do in the meantime is confirm that.
One way we can confirm it really quickly is by what you've got shows we don't own anything close to the Taylor property. If our property butts up, if we are the adjoining tract to the Taylor property on that deed, then we know that there's more land behind it. That's very clear, without anything surveyed or not. We know at that point, if it states in our deed that we butt up to the Taylor property, then we already know.
We'll call them and ask the question, but y'all can look at what you want to look at. We'll compare notes. I'll talk through the mayor's office. If you all find something to be the fact and can communicate and give it to the mayor, and then I'll coordinate back what we talked to the engineers. But the base concept of what we said, Mark, think we put together an adjustment there by the 18th?
We can make it happen. I think we can figure it out. I think so. We can square some stuff off. But I think we can make it happen.
Get some trash.
Yeah, I think we can make it happen.
So we'll plan to come back and not take your whole, that workshop, but at least a sliver of it to say, hey, we did it, or no, we found out there's a nuclear reactor buried somewhere over there or something. But I think it's a possibility. Yes,
What's the projection of that cost, just to make that change between now and then?
for us to do it, do it.
Yes,
So then you do.
We've been doing that now.
Going against what I've got, but that's one of the.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, well,
When you start talking multi-level, things of that nature, I think multi-level seems to be a little cheaper in.
as long as we keep it with offices and not try to put it in his jail. Now, but you asked a question earlier. this assumes that the jail housing has a mezzanine. So, and I can show you. We've done so many of these. Oh, I thought I had buried in here one showing what it would show you a picture of is a mezzanine, which was, oh, wait.
Well, you got, no, you just had the ground floor, didn't you?
Oh, here it is.
Did you?
Okay, here's a sketch, a section cut. And it's a section cut through that pie, if you will. And if you notice, the control point is elevated and the housing is stacked. A layperson might say that's 2 stories, but technically by code, it's a mezzanine. So what it is this room were a full housing pie and I was in the control in the middle, I would be elevated. So I'd be at the upper level here and I'd be looking out into the pie sections of the apple pie. And the outside walls you see is the cells or the dorm beds are stacked. So what you're doing is you're maximizing staff control from the least number of points. It decreases staff, maximizes safety, but that is in effect 2-story. And I think you guys, yes, ma'am.
Where I work, that's how it is. Most of our Charleston County jailers are retired people. It's really hard walking up those steps. Really hard. And you're.
This does assume in that housing that those are able-bodied personnel because you're dealing with backing up other law enforcement officers.
People push them over the railing to kill them, and you gotta, when they're locked down, you gotta take their food up there.
Y'all deal with a whole different class of folks than right is at the jail typically.
Okay.
But you gotta have the, employees to walk up there.
This man lives about a stone throw, Arkansas. You drive back tonight?
No, sir, I'm staying here tonight, or, well, I'm staying at the Hampton Inn Living. So.
We've been doing this for about an hour and a half. Is he coming back on the 18th? Is that what we're saying? Anybody, you know, any more questions?
Okay. We did promise we'd keep it under 2 hours, and you guys laughed at me.
But I think, I just want to make sure I feel like we're all at the same point. We want something looking like we're on this land brought back to us on that night.
And we're going office courts on top of the sheriff's office, and then housing, so that they can operate the way they need to operate to minimize staffing. Because I don't know if you remember, years ago, we showed you the slide that's saying 80% of the cost you'll put in a 30-year facility, 80% of that's going to be staffing cost. And so everywhere we're going here needs to be sensitive to how he staffs that jail. Less than 20% of the dollars we're worried about, whether it's land or multi-story, will be in construction. 80% will be his staff. So that's why you see me being sensitive to that. That's a different story.
But at this point, what I heard a minute ago, we're looking at single story for jail sales.
No, double story for the cells, but operationally it's single story. And then it's the offices that are stacked with the sheriff's office on the ground level. All right, the 18th, people got dinner to eat and babies to kiss.
One last on that. If we're going 3 stories on the court, why would we not be going 3 stories on the sales?
Then you need multiple control.
Yeah, we did that one time. And we said we'd never do it again. What happens is your sidelines really.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it looks like the Death Star from Star Wars.
I mean,
So.
technically it's legal, but it's operationally a pain, and he'd be mad.
That's why I've come off those.
Yeah.
I do want to, while I'm here, I want to say this, that Sheriff is well aware we did certify you for 2024. And because y'all are working, you're doing your due diligence, TCI appreciates that. So I actually spoke for you at the border control and it wasn't a problem whatsoever, just a matter of minutes they agreed to do it. So congratulations on that. 24. 25 started January 1, and I can't tell you when they're coming again, but look, as hard as y'all are working and as engaged as y'all are, I'm not worried about that one bit. That, you know, when you have counties that just lay down and they don't want to do any work, and they lose their certification. I don't see that happening here. I like this meeting tonight. Thank you. Loved it. Congratulations.
Going once? Go home. Thank you. So I got an answer.